How's it going? My name's Chico. I reside and live in Brantford, born and raised, and currently singing gag order. Okay, so what got me into punk and hardcore music? My story's probably pretty similar to a lot of people that are around my age that are still kind of into the scene. I started out as a metalhead, young metalhead, about 11, 12, 13 years old. Into the usual bands of the day: Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Motorhead. And there used to be a video show. That was the time. This was the early '80s, and music videos were starting to be the big thing. And there was a video show called Toronto Rocks, and it ran Monday to Fridays. And on Wednesdays they had a metal day, right? So I'd always rush home from school and watch the metal show on Wednesdays. And I was introduced to a lot of bands that way. And I remember the first time they played Venom on Midweek Metal Main. It was like, holy fuck, what the fuck is this? This is like the most evilest, heaviest shit I had heard up to that point. So from there it just kind of grew into more heavier music. I got into Slayer and Metallica, all the thrash bands of the day, Anthrax, into the death metal stuff like Possessed and Bathory and Creator and a lot of stuff from Europe. And then I guess it would have been around 85, 86, mid-80s, where Anthrax guys decided to release a project called SOD. And it was like a mixture of hardcore and punk. So it was a pivotal record because at that time this crossover term was like a big thing, right? It's like it was everywhere. You're reading it in the magazine stuff like, well, what the fuck is crossover, right? So it was a mixture between hardcore punk and metal. And I really didn't know much about hardcore punk at the time, but I was very curious. And my brother, who also was a metalhead around the same time, he had a girl in his class, one of his high school classes, who was a punk rock girl. And she too was curious about this crossover stuff. So, but for opposite reasons. We wanted to hear the punk and hardcore, and she wanted to kind of hear the thrash and the metal stuff. So of course we started trading tapes, and some of the first stuff that I remember my brother bringing home was like the Circle Jerks, Minor Threat, Dead Kennedys was one. MDC, Millions of Dead Cops, which the name was like just kind of blew me away. Millions of Dead Cops, that's fucking cool, right? GBH was another. So these were some of the first few sort of hardcore and punk bands that I was exposed to. And by that time I was kind of into a lot of death metal and stuff, and singing about Satan and murdering babies and shit like this, right? And the one thing that I kind of remember when I first started hearing this punk stuff and this hardcore stuff was the lyrical content. Like they were singing about real shit, and it was fucking neat, right? And I remember the first time putting In God We Trust on Dead Kennedys, that tape that they had lent my brother. And it was funny, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but for whatever reason I didn't think the Dead Kennedys sounded the way they ended up sounding. I don't know what I thought they sounded like, but for whatever reason, put In God We Trust on, it was like dun, 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 fucking religious vomit, right? And fucking Jello like a maniac. And it just like, what the fuck is this? It was like brilliant. Like Jello's one of those guys that you either love his voice or you hate his voice or whatever, love him or hate him. But I really dug it. I thought it was nothing like I had ever heard before. It was totally intense. So I really got kind of obsessed with it. And it was funny because right around that time I had another buddy. We were all metalheads, right? And he had this really nice pretty boy metal hair, right? And he used to go to Toronto and get his hair done. He would spend all kinds of money getting his hair done and whatnot. And he had an appointment, and he said, he invited me and another buddy. He said, why don't you guys come down? I'll get my hair done. And that sounds funny just saying that. I get my hair done, and then we'll go check out the head shops and some record stores and whatnot, right? So his dad drives us up there and drops us off at this woman's shop. And I still remember, it was called We Care for Your Long Hair. And we were about 16, 17 at the time, tops. And I remember we walked up into her shop, and she had a pretty good gig going. I'm guessing she was probably 25, mid-20s to 30s. Her name, I think, was Lisa Marie or something like that. I kind of sort of remember her name. And anyway, she had all these autographed pictures of all these metal bands and rock girls and everything, rock and roll dudes, whose hair she had done. And I remember at the time there was this band called Madam X, and if anybody remembers Madam X, they had like really fucking big ass hair. And there was this big autographed picture of Madam X with thank you Lisa for what you'd done to our hair and shit like this. So that was pretty cool. Like she had a lot of autographed pictures on her wall. So she had a pretty good thing going on. So my buddy's getting his hair done, and I remember in the corner she had a table full of books, like magazines, rock magazines and shit, and they were all glossy, you know. And there was a couple other clients there, and I was a bit sort of nervous and shy at the time, so it took me a few minutes to get up and actually go over and take a look at these magazines. But I do remember sitting there looking over, and there was, you know, glossy, you know, high quality magazine, but there was this black and white one over there that just kind of looked out of place. So when I finally got up to go take a look, I went over, and of course I went to the black and white one, and I pick it up, Maximum Rock and Roll. What the fuck is this? It's like it's like newsprint, right? It's just like really shitty quality, and it's like, but I was drawn to it. So that's a punk and hardcore magazine. So it was like, cool, man. So I sit down and I'm leafing through it. My buddy's getting his hair done. And I'm thinking, fuck, I need to get one of these magazines, right? There's a lot of fucking cool, like a lot of cool looking shit in this, right? I'd like to order some stuff. Anyways, his appointment gets done, finished. Throw the magazine down, and the shop was only a few blocks away from Maple Leaf Gardens at that time. The record peddler was on Carlton across from the garden, so that was our first stop. So I remember we walked into the record peddler, and you know when you go to a record store, they have the first rack of the new releases or the albums that, you know, the must-have albums or the new shit that you got to check out, right? And I remember going in the door, and there was an album on the rack that caught my attention, and so I walked to it, I pick it up, and it's Nancy and Ronald Reagan and a fucking abortion and jelly beans. It's a painting of Nancy and Ronald Reagan sitting there with this fucking baby on a plate and these jelly beans. I'm thinking, oh, abortions. What the fuck is this? Looked great, right? So I'm looking at it. I turn it around. I'm reading the song titles. I'm chuckling, and I noticed that one of the guy's monikers was, or the name that he went by was Wayne Gretzky. And being from Brantford, I thought, oh fuck, I gotta take this home, right? So of course I picked that up. I picked up a couple other things, and walking around the store, I got to their magazine rack, and sure enough, there was some copies of Maximum Rock and Roll in the magazine rack. So fuck, so picked one of those up. So basically spent all my money in our first store that we had went to, but that was fine. Anyways, I remember we went back. I got back home, threw the Dayglow album on. It was fucking phenomenal. Flipping through Maximum Rock and Roll, and that was it. I mean, that was where it kind of began. I made a few pen pals. I started ordering records. Not too long after that, the long hair came off, the mohawk went up, and I just dove straight into it and kind of never looked back. And that's how it went. Okay, main influences, personal or musical? Well, I remember growing up in a house that there was always music around. Funny story, my dad, this was before I was born, my dad played in a wedding band. He played drums in a wedding band. And when him and my mom started dating, he would play quite a bit, Saturday nights, weekend stuff, weddings and stuff. And I remember when I was a young kid, there was always drums around, but partial drums. He had like a snare drum lying around, and there was hi-hats and kick drum, just bits and pieces, some cymbals. And I remember banging on them as a young kid, but it never took. I didn't have patience or none, so unfortunately I didn't really stick with it. But I do remember banging on them as a young kid. And then I remember it was like probably a Christmas gathering, family gathering. I had a cousin that played the accordion, and he brought his accordion out and he started playing the accordion. And then he took a break, and my mom picks up this accordion, and I had no fucking idea. I'm probably 4 or 5 years old. Picks up this accordion, starts playing the accordion. I'm like, what the fuck? My mom knows how to play the accordion. So anyways, yeah, my grandfather, her dad, always wanted her to play an instrument, so she took accordion lessons when she was a teenager for about 4 years. So she messed around with the accordion. Never really went anywhere, but she could play the accordion. And my dad, unbeknownst to me, because the band broke up when they got married. Don't get married. You can't fucking be in a band anymore. Played drums in a wedding band. So, and I remember, so music was always around. I remember some of my earliest memories before even kindergarten. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she would always be doing housework, and she'd always have music on, like the Everly Brothers and Bobby Vinton and those great K-Tel records back in those days, right? So I always remember really liking music. I'd be playing with my trucks and my toys. My mom would be doing housework, and there was always music in the background. So I took a liking to music at a young age. So that that really kind of got me into it. I remember 10 years old, on my Christmas list, I had the Monks' Bad Habits and Gary Newman's Pleasure Principle. They were probably the two first albums I actually got. They're probably still in my collection. I'm pretty sure they're still in my collection now. So yeah, music was always kind of a thing around the house. And then, of course, once I got into punk and stuff like that, I started hanging out with some buddies that were kind of already playing instruments and playing in bands. And it really was just a matter of time before I started singing in a punk band of my own. But I was, by that time, 19, so I was pretty late getting into that as far as being in a band. But those were my influences musically. Okay, first punk show for our first concert, first punk show. Okay, for my first big concert, I was 14 years old, Maple Leaf Gardens, Twisted Sister, and Iron Maiden. And it was fucking great. I was a huge Twisted Sister fan back in the day, huge Maiden fan, but I actually liked Twisted Sister better. I remember when I first saw the You Can't Stop Rock and Roll video, just fell in love with Twisted Sister. So that was my first fucking big concert. It was awesome, still remember it pretty clearly, surprisingly. It's been so long. Okay, and first punk show would have been probably 86, 87. There was a local band around town called Social Suicide. They were around from like the mid 80s to the late 80s, early 90s. They gigged around GTA quite a bit. They were good buddies with Problem Children back in those days. So they set up a show here in town with Social Suicide, Problem Children. And there was a local mod band at the time called Empty Hours, who are actually still playing to this day. I'm good friends with those guys. So yeah, that was my first show. I was Social Suicide, Problem Children, first punk show, Social Suicide, Problem Children, and Empty Hours. And it was at a community center. And it was pretty cool because back in those days, it was pretty cheap to run a community center, right? As opposed to now. And it was pretty common in Brantford where there wasn't too many bars that would allow you to play. So a lot of people would rent halls and rent community centers to do gigs, and it was fairly cheap. But back then you could get 150 to 200 kids out to these gigs. Unlike today where it's like, forget it, you'd lose your shirt. But yeah, those were my first two gigs. There was, like, big one was Iron Maiden and Twisted Sister, and then the first punk show was Social Suicide, Problem Children. Favorite shows I saw? Fuck, that's a tough one. There's been a lot of them over the years. Probably 88, 89, seeing Poison Idea in Kensington Market at the Siboney Club. Definitely a fucking highlight. Poison Idea is my all-time favorite hardcore punk band. Fucking never put out a bad record. Fucking amazing. I remember Jerry would blow fire. And 89, I mean, that's when they were kind of right at their fucking peak, too. I remember Pig was still in the band. He was still alive. And the Siboney Club, so it was a fairly big stage, and on each side of the stage you had steps that went up 5 or 6 steps to get up to the stage. And I remember it was Poison Idea was just getting ready to go on. And Pig Champion, anybody knew Pig Champion, he was a big guy, he weighed like 500 pounds. And he came out of the back room, and it took him a few minutes just to get up the 5 steps. And he needed some help getting up the steps, but once he got up on that fucking stage, man, the crowd went crazy. He walked across the stage, picked up his guitar, and they tore into, I can't remember what song it is that they tore into first, but fuck, they were so good. Love Poison Idea. So that is definitely one of my highlights, getting to see them right at their prime, late 80s, early 90s, when they were at their fucking best. And then a funny story, this was probably 87. Me and my buddies, the Bad Brains, were playing in London, Ontario. It was at like a Polish hall or something. It wasn't like a bar or a venue. And the funny thing about it is it was $17. The ticket price was $17. And I remember me and my buddies bitching about it. Like, what the fuck? Bad Brains, $17? Who the fuck do they think they are? When you're 17, everything should be free. Every band should play for nothing, Ooh, bad capitalist pigs. So we were bitching the whole time about paying $17 to see the Bad Brains, but once they fucking played, it was like your jaw fucking dropped. How fucking good the Bad Brains were, right? They were worth fucking $57 fucking dollars, man. So that was awesome. Just the wake up call of like, dude, man, nothing in life is free, man. People who are that good deserve to be paid some fucking money. So that was awesome. And then a lot of shows over the years. I mean, there was shows that we played on. But there was a lot of local shows that were a lot of fun. Even more recently, I got to see the Addicts for the first time in Kitchener just for about 4 or 5 years ago before this COVID bullshit. And holy fuck, they were amazing. That was probably one of the best shows I've seen in probably 10 years. There's the stage presence of Monkey, and it was fucking great. I got to see the Stiff Little Fingers just a year or two prior to that in Toronto for the first time, and that was great. Jake Burns can still sing up a storm. A lot of shows over the years that I kind of forgot about or whatever. I was fortunate enough to see Fear at the Opera House back in probably the early 2000s or late 90s, so that was pretty cool. And a lot of local shows that were a lot of fun over the years. I mean, a lot of crazy shit. You'd be surprised how much crazy shit happened at local shows. I remember we had a local show. Our band Drunken Anger played a local show at the Hungarian Hall, and it was funny. It was an older Hungarian couple that managed the hall, and we played. I think we were the last band on the bill, and there was some different bands on the bill that weren't like punk or hardcore. So everything was pretty tame, and then I remember we got on, and the poor lady, she didn't know what to expect, so there was a pit that started, and she didn't know what the fuck was going on. She thought the hall was going to get trashed, so she started hitting people with a pool cue that were dancing in the pit. So the funny stuff like that. A lot of the favorite shows were just, a lot of them were just small shows and the funny things that happened. But definitely the Poison Idea one was for sure a fucking highlight. I was fortunate enough to see them again about 6 years ago in Toronto. Pig long gone, obviously, but yeah, I mean, my memory, it doesn't serve me well all the time. A lot of times people have to remind me of shit that I've seen or over the years, but those were definitely some of the highlights. Past and present bands. So my first band was Drunken Anger. We started in 1990, late 89, 1990. That lasted till about 99, and that was a bunch of buddies. We were a bunch of buddies. Some of these guys were already playing in some local punk bands at the time. We were all hanging out, doing our thing, and so we decided to form Drunken Anger. And that's kind of where it all started. We played we played quite a few shows around the GTA, got into the Toronto scene a little bit, made a lot of good friends in the Toronto scene, friends that we all still have to this day, which is fucking awesome, which is one of the best things about music, is you meet these friends and they become friends for life. So yeah, Drunken Anger went until about 99. There was a bunch of lineup changes. And then 99, I did a short stint with a band called Democracy Crisis that lasted with me anyways about a year and a half. And then right around that time, my wife was pregnant with our first child, and the band really wasn't going anywhere, so it was kind of like, yeah, I walked away, and they continued on for a little bit longer, but I walked away and I decided to concentrate on being a dad for a little bit. And that was an awesome experience. It's fun. This was from about 2000 to 2003, 2004, where I really didn't do anything musically. And I didn't miss it. That was the funny thing. I didn't really miss it when I was at home and I was with my newborn and my baby and being a dad. I mean, obviously those are great fucking things, right? So I didn't miss it, but when I went out to see bands and see other people play, that's when I missed it. So I remember, I guess this probably would have been 2003, 2004. I come home, I was getting some groceries, and I came home, and on the porch was an old buddy of my brother's, Rob, who was talking to my wife, and he was a drummer and a musician. And so I come up, hey Rob, how's it going? I hadn't seen him in a while, and he was talking about how him and some buddies were jamming, and he wanted to know if I wanted to chum and check it out. And so, sure, man, let's go. My daughter by this time was already 3, so things were going pretty good. So I was like, fuck yeah, okay, I'll come and check it out. So that was the beginning of the cluster bombs, and the cluster bombs lasted for about 7 years, I believe, 7 or 8 years before that kind of dissolved and you know, had its day kind of thing. And then me and Glenn was in the cluster bombs too. Formed a gag order in 2010, and been gag order ever since. And you know, COVID's fucked up some shit as far as playing and getting, and we've had some lineup issues and some stuff going right now. But I mean, I think right now things are kind of on track again. So hopefully, once this COVID shit's behind us, we'll be back ready playing some shows. Craziest things at a show. Wow. There's a lot of crazy things over the years when I think about it. A lot of local crazy shit, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about things that kind of prolonged over the years, because this is stuff that, you know, hopefully lots of people watch this because they'll probably relate to some of this shit. Through the 90s, there was a thing called Punk Fest. And Punk Fest was the creation of Warren Hastings, otherwise known as Spider. So anybody who knows Spider, knew Spider back in the day, Spider was this fucking larger than life character. He stood about 6'5", 6'6". He was a lot older than the rest of us. He grew up in England. He was around the first wave of punk. And there was rumors that he fucking drove the Sex Pistols around England and shit like that. He was a bit of a roadie. He had a lot of great stories. And he was a larger than life character. He was super nice, super friendly. I always had this bright fucking mane of hair, whether it was bright pink or bright blue or bright green, and he stood out like a sore thumb. And he was just an awesome dude. Anyways, he had this chunk of land, and it was a big chunk of land, like, I don't even know how many acres, but like over 100 acres of land up in Marmor, Ontario. Marmor, Ontario is about halfway between Peterborough and Ottawa on Highway 7. And he started throwing these parties in the early 90s. And they were birthday parties that he would throw for himself. So his birthday was on July 13th, I believe. And so every second weekend of July, he would throw these parties on his property. So the first year that I went was 93. And I think maybe he started in 91, 92. But 93 was kind of the one that was the first one for a lot of us, the people that we've talked about it over the years and stuff. Because they were kind of legendary, these parties. So we would throw these parties, and in 93 was the first year I went, and so at that time he had a house not too far off the side road to get to, right? And it wasn't too far off the side road, and he had this house, and on the back of the house he had a porch, and the porch served as the stage for the band. So he would throw these parties every second weekend in July, and he would invite all these bands down, and it was a party, you know. Bring as much beer as you want. Bring as much drugs as you want. There was no security. There was nobody checking your backpack. There was no fucking St. John's ambulance or anything around like that. It was kind of, come, you got 48 hours, and basically don't be an asshole and do whatever the fuck you want. That was basic. So what do you think was going to happen, right? But 93 was the first year I went. 93 was actually, at this time it was still fairly small. There was maybe only 150, 200 punks at that one. But I remember the headliner in 93 was the fucking UK Subs. So he had the UK Subs playing on his back porch in 93. So that alone is fucking crazy right there, right? So it was a great time. He actually had the first year in 93 too, he had carnival rides. So he had a merry-go-round, and I think he had a scrambler maybe. I know he had at least a merry-go-round anyways. Maybe a bouncy castle. So you picture a bunch of drunk punks fucking hanging off a merry-go-round and all this shit, right? So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun that year. Nothing too crazy that I remember that first year. But then, so that was 93. UK Subs headlined it. They played on his back porch, so that alone was fucking awesome. And then things kind of got bigger after that. So anyway, Spider got into this, and there's people maybe watching this that will know more details of it, but he got into this local feud with these fucking local yahoos, and they burned his fucking house down. So So he ended up getting a trailer on the property, and he lived out of the trailer, and he decided, well, I don't give a fuck. I'm going to still have these parties every year. I don't give a fuck. So him and some friends, he had a shitload of land. He built this big giant stage way back farther into his property. There was a pathway that was just kind of big enough for a vehicle to get through, a car or a truck, so that bands could bring their equipment and their gear up. And it was a big ass stage, a great stage, fucking wood. It had a canopy over top of it. It stood probably 20, 25 feet tall. It was awesome, and it kind of was in an open area where it was kind of like the ground. There was a flat part, there was a stage, a flat part, and then it kind of went up. So it was kind of like an amphitheater kind of thing. So it was pretty fucking cool, right? And things after '93 kind of got a little bit bigger, right? And Spider was one of these guys that there was very little organization to this festival. It was like, if you asked Spider, hey, if you were in a band, hey, can we play? Yeah, fucking right, you can play. Come on out. Anybody can play. Like, there was no fucking organization. All these bands. And I remember it was getting pretty big. When I say big, it wasn't like thousands of people, but I remember there was a few years that maybe it was pushing 1,000 people there. I don't know. 700, 800 anyways. But there was a period where he had bands coming from all over the States. The Casualties were regulars before they were anybody. Choking Victim was another band that made it up a few times. Submachine, the boys from Pittsburgh, would come down pretty regularly. Blank 77, I know, made an appearance once or twice. So there was a lot of great bands, and some bands coming from California all over the place. I know he had Red Alert from the UK come over and headline another year. So he had a lot of connections, and he was just a super great guy, right? And the thing is, like I said, there was no rules. He says, yeah, come on over. Bring as much drugs. Bring as much beer. Nobody's going to check your backpack. Do whatever the fuck you want. Don't be an asshole. Just do whatever you want. And so you can imagine the shit that ensued. There was a lot of nakedness. I mean, fires all over the place. People falling in fires, jumping in fires. People being burnt. People fucking, hurting their ankles, whether they breaking them or spraining them, or their arms or shit, and then making their own slings and fucking. It was total fucking mayhem, right? And it was not uncommon to see the paramedics come in 2 or 3, 4 times over a course of a weekend, take somebody out because they were fucking ODing. I mean, it was fucking insane because there was like no rules. And the funny thing is like, as crazy as it was, there was I don't remember many fights, if there was any fights, to be honest with you, that I remember. But it was just insanity. Punks would crawl up on top of the stage, on top like 20 feet up in the air, and fucking once in a while one of them would fall off or something. But they'd be so fucking drunk that it would like, you were like rubber, right? I remember another year there was a girl that she got ran over by a pickup truck right over her back, and luckily we had gotten a lot of rain, so the ground was really wet and fucking muddy, so it kind of just smushed her into the fucking ground. And so she ended up going to the hospital to get checked out, but she was back within a couple hours. She had some bruised ribs and some scrapes or shit like that, just minor injuries. So she came back, and I mean, like I said, just the chaos. You would walk down this path to the stage, right? Because a lot of times you would park closer to the road and you'd have to walk down the path to get to the stage. And at night, if you didn't have a flash up light, you were fucked because it was so dark. But it was probably a 5-10 minute walk, I'm guessing, from what I recall. But in the daytime, everybody would set up camp along the path. And like I said, there was so much drugs. People would advertise with they would take a shitty marker and a piece of cardboard and nail it to a tree, and like, PCP here and LSD here and fucking mushrooms here. And it was like a fucking drugstore, right? You could pretty much get, and they were always bartering, like, I give you some PCP for your CD or your T-shirt or whatever. So it was just great. It was like a fucking circus, right? And like I said, a lot of nakedness, a lot of nudity, and it was kind of year after year, it kind of got sort of bigger and bigger. But at the same time, it was pissing off the locals, right? And I think what happened is there was a tragic year where a girl ended up taking her own life in the backwoods. And so shit got pretty serious pretty quick. And so now his parties became a discussion in the town hall meetings and shit like that, and they wanted to shut him down. and because he didn't have permits or anything like that. So he was eventually, these parties were eventually shut down by the late 90s. But like I said, stuff that happened there was like, I mean, legendary, right? I mean, other than like that, the poor girl that took her life. I mean, for the most part, it was just a lot of crazy fun. But like I said, people making their own slings if they hurt their arms or their shoulders or fucking, you know, it was just insanity. It really was insanity. So, I mean, like I said, I can't pinpoint it down to one show. But anybody who was at Punk Fest during the 90s, during those years, knows exactly what I was talking about, what I'm talking about. Fucking some really fun times. So, what do I like and dislike most about being a musician? Well, fuck. First of all, being a musician, that's a. Me being a musician, that's kind of funny to begin with. But, anyways, the best thing about being a musician is the people you meet over the years. That is definitely by far the best thing that about being a musician, that you can go to different towns and places and you kind of know somebody, or you've had an experience there with somebody. So that is definitely, you make friendships, and those friendships tend to last over years, even beyond bands and whatnot. So that is definitely the best thing about being a musician. Worst thing about being a musician and kind of having a band going, if you're one of the guys in the band that kind of keeps shit together, and you're the glue and you're doing the organizing and the kind of, getting shit and figuring out when you're jamming and doing that, it's like a family. It's fucking, you have to deal with people's different personalities and whether or not they're on the same page as you and shit like that. So sometimes it can be frustrating, and you can feel like, fuck, man, this is supposed to be fun, and it becomes a big headache. But, in the end, it's fucking all worthwhile. If you get a good group of guys together in a group, it's a lot of fucking fun. There's nothing funner than being in a band, and the experience and memories that are made over the years are fucking worth it. Favorite food? Fuck, I like all food, man. If it's done authentically, right, with love, I'll love it. Whether it's Mexican food, Indian food, Middle Eastern food, Italian food. If you make food and you make it with love and it's fucking good, put it in front of me. I'll fucking eat it all. Food rules. You gotta eat. Most useless talent. Okay, here we go. Cue the dramatic music. Everybody excited? Drama. Okay, we're gonna make one more fold here. Not so useless. Cheers. Done.